Hi, I'm Roxanne Richardson, and this is the Casual Friday podcast. In this week's podcast, I have a finished project and I have a lot of progress on my Finish It February goals, including the repair of a 35-year-old Intarsia sweater that I'm really pleased with. So let's get started. In the past, I've always used Finish It February to actually finish knitting projects. I've done it often enough, and I've maintained this habit of kind of staying on top of my knitting projects that I don't really have many unfinished knitting projects this year. So I started a new project. When all else fails and I don't know what to knit, I knit a sock. I haven't woven the ends in. I haven't washed them. They literally just came off the needles a couple of minutes ago. They would have come off the needles on Tuesday if I hadn't left the last 2 rounds. I think maybe it was 2.5 rounds. And the last round is 8 stitches. So we're talking there were, 20 stitches or 24 stitches on the needles when I put it down. And the reason I put it down, first, let me just tell you what this yarn is. This is like a almost vintage Opal sock yarn. It's called Save the Seeds. It's one of those Hundertwassers, Werk, whatever. I can't pronounce things in German. Opal would have these themes of Save the Seas or the ladybugs or, some painter or something that they would use as inspiration. And then they would create these colorways. So I got this yarn at our Guild's garage sale back in August. There's a bunch of self-striping sock yarn, and I love self-striping sock yarn. We had a couple of Guild members who died, and their stashes got donated to the Guild. So one of the things I am really picky about with my self-striping socks is that I want them to match. So I pay attention to where I am, like at a color change or something, and start my cast on there. And for this one, I looked at where it was switching from like this kind of gray or white color to the blue. I measured off 1 yard of the blue and started my cast on there. And I took note of that and I wrote it down, and so that I could start my other one in the second place. And I keep track of, where I am in the colorway, and it got tricky down at the heel. I do what's called a plain heel. It's like an afterthought or forethought heel, except you do it when you get to the heel instead of later. So, I just continue with the colorway, and I'm working in the round all the way down to the heel. So then I want to wind off the colorway to the point where I was when I started the heel, so that I could continue on with the foot. And I'm paying attention to how long it is, how many rounds I'm working based on my row gauge, so that I know where I'm starting the toe, like what round of the foot I'm starting the toe on, so that I can make my socks match as closely as possible. So here are the socks that I'm wearing right now. And they match pretty well at the end. This one's got a little bit more purple at the end, but these are pretty good. I've got the brown stripe on both and then some purple at the toe. So I was really happy with that. So what I noticed with the second sock, this is the second sock, is that I was keeping very even row for row, round for round, one foot with the other, until I got to close to the part where I was supposed to start the toe. And then I noticed I was just kind of off a little bit, and also just the length of the sock itself, the foot of the sock, was getting long enough, but I wasn't at the same place in the colorway. So I thought, well, okay, I'm at the same place in the colorway. I'm maybe a round or 2 off from where I was in the first sock. I know this sounds nuts, but this is my thing. But I'm going to go ahead and start the toe, and so then they will, be even. And so this is the first one. I've got the blue. This is where I started the toe, and I've got these different colors all the way here. It looks really nice. And I get to this one, and I realize that most of this whole tip is going to be this color. And that was when I got disgusted and I put it to the side. And I finally just decided yesterday, it's so dumb. What are you going to do? You're going to knit your sock longer so that it's too long in order to make it match? Just let it go. So I went ahead and I finished the sock, and they match really perfectly all the way just until the end of the toe. I'm perfectionistic about some things. I like to get a good result if I know that I can. I'm certainly not like a type A personality, but for some reason I want my socks to match each other perfectly. My mother, I used to make her self-striping socks. She took it a step further. She wanted her socks to match her outfit. And I'm like, oh, I don't care about that. I just want my socks to match each other. So I should mention a little bit about things like gauge and stuff like that. This is the sock yarn that recommends 30 stitches over 4 inches or 10 centimeters. That's what the yarn label says, is that's how many stitches per inch. I knit my socks to a firmer gauge, usually 10 to 15% more stitches than what it says in the ball band. For this kind of yarn weight, considered maybe a light fingering, I would normally use a US 0, which is a 2mm needle. I used to be able to get 9 stitches per inch with a needle size like that. I can't do it anymore. I think my hands just don't do that, or my tension, how I tension the yarn has changed over the years. I can only get 8.5 stitches now. So the ball band says 7.5, and I knit it, 8.5 or 9 if I can get it. These were knit cuff down. I use the plain heel. I do have videos on how the plain heel is worked. And then for the toe, I use what's called a round toe, and there are different versions. There's a long round toe, which is typically what I use, and then there's a short round toe. For both of them, typically what you're doing is 8 decreases in a decrease round. So for a long round toe, you might start out with like knit 6, knit 2 together, knit 6, knit 2 together, and then you might have 6 rounds where you're not doing any decreases, and then knit 5, knit 2 together, knit 5, and then 5 rounds where you're not doing any decreases like that. So you're working one fewer plain round every time, and the decrease rounds are getting closer and closer together. The short round toe is one where you do your decreases the same, but you only have 2 plain rounds after every decrease round. You can vary that based on how long you want your actual toe to be. So I do have videos on the round toe, the long version and the short version, how to recalculate if you need to, like if your row gauge is not what you expected, or if you need your toes longer or shorter, all of that kind of thing. I've got videos on that, which I will link to down in the video description. One of the truly unfinished projects I do have is a spinning project that I started last August and worked on for a bit in the fall, and then stopped working on it. So I picked it back up in February, and I want to show you my progress on that. So spinning progress. Back this summer, I bought 2 braids of this fiber called Wham, which is wool alpaca mohair blend, from Get Bents. She had a stall at a farmer's market in downtown, and I really liked it. I spun it up, and I got exactly the kind of yarn I wanted. I had 2 braids, and they're 2 ounces each, so I think this is 4 ounces then, and I got exactly the yarn I was hoping for, and I thought, I loved spinning it, and I want to get some more of it and knit a sweater's quantity. So I started on that, and then when we went to the Netherlands in October, I ended up not spinning that month. That I just fell off the spinning wagon. And so I got back on in February, and I've been spinning so far. This is kind of what I've spun. I think one of these bobbins was partially full when I started spinning. So this is what I've spun so far this month. This is what I had spun before. And I have just 1 ounce left in the 9th braid. I think it's the 9th braid. No, the 11th braid. This is braid number 12, which is kind of a spare. I might go ahead and spin this. I'm trying to decide what I want to do. I think what I want to do is some sort of a cardigan. I want to make my own thread buttons. That's my plan. Maybe I will dye some of this and do some contrast color somewhere, like just even the edges of the ribbing, maybe a little bit of stranded color work at cuffs or something. I don't want to, certainly not going to knit any sort of top-down stranded yoke sweater. They're lovely to look at. I have no interest in knitting one. So that isn't in the works, isn't in the plan. I'm really close to getting done. I will be done with the spinning this weekend. Then I have to do all of the plying, and then I have to figure out what it is I'm going to knit. That's the part that's tricky for me, thinking that through. So I won't be using a pattern. I have to figure out what gauge I'm going to get, and I'll just design it myself. I really am thinking about dyeing some of this Wham fiber to use as a contrast. And I know that because it's slightly tonal, there's different shades of gray in it, it will dye up really nicely. What I don't know is how much of a contrast I can get between something that's dyed and this gray yarn. I'd be curious to know what kind of colors you guys would suggest. I love red, purple, blue, those kinds of colors. So if you have any suggestions for what kind of color, and I'm just really looking for one color to contrast with it or to use with it, and that's about it. So let me know down in the comments if you have ideas for what sort of color I could use in my hand spun sweater. If you are a regular viewer of my Technique Tuesday videos, you will have heard me say over and over again, there are always multiple ways of getting to the same endpoint in knitting. And it's true, there are always choices. Now, as a knitter, you may not know that you have multiple options. You may not, or you may know that there are more options, but you don't know what they are. So the sweater repair that I made was on a 35-year-old sweater. I'd knit it for my nephew back in like 1989. He wore it, his sister wore it, his kids wore it, and now her kids are ready to wear it, but it had a hole in it. And my brother asked me if I could repair it, and I said I certainly thought so. I knew some options for how I could go about doing the repair, but I really wanted it to look nice because I wasn't repairing the sole of a sock where nobody's going to see it, and what you're focusing on might be, is it still going to be comfortable to wear? Versus everybody's going to see that, so what is it that I want them to see, and how am I going to fix it in a way that I'm going to be happy with what I see? So my brother sent me this sweater back in the fall while I was knitting brand new sweaters for his grandchildren. And I kind of been thinking about it for a few months. I knew I'd probably do it and finish it February, but I'd been really thinking about what my options were. And I wasn't completely happy with my options. I didn't think any of them were going to give a result that I would really like because it was in such a visible place on the sweater. Like if it was in the underarm or on the back of a sleeve or something, I wouldn't have been quite as concerned. But this is just like the eye is, is going to go to this location. So I've been thinking about what my choices were and what would work and wouldn't work, because not only did I have to make a repair, I had to make it in Intarsia fabric, right at the edge of where two colors were changing. Which made a difference in what I felt I could do. What I ended up with was a brilliant solution that I am giving credit to Assia Brill. She wrote the book Stitch a couple of years ago. She made the suggestion. I had heard of this technique that she was recommending vaguely, but I'd never really explored it before because it wasn't something that I really needed. But she not only said, I think this technique will work, your situation is slightly different from how this technique has usually worked. And so here, let me show you what I think could work in your specific situation. And she hand drew pictures of this and posted them in my Ravelry group. So I want to go through, what the choices were that I was contemplating, why I didn't think they would work or I wouldn't be happy with them. And then I'll go through the solution that Assia suggested and show you the results. I did film the process of making the repair. There was over an hour of footage. This is not a tutorial. It is me understanding what needed to be done and doing something for the first time and focusing intently on it. Sometimes my hair got in the way of the camera because I was not focusing on whether or not this was a good shot and how I was going to explain it to the people watching. I was thinking about how am I going to actually get this done. You know, I've edited it way down. I've hopefully edited it in a way that you can understand the process. And I will provide links down below to other information about the solution that I used. So let's go to the overhead and you can watch the transformation. So this is the hole that I have shown you before that I was puzzling about how exactly I was going to repair it. So what you can see here is that this yarn that has come loose is completely like felted. I don't think that this is actually wool. I think it's probably acrylic, but it's just been abraded so much that there really aren't any loose ends, and it's kind of felted a little bit around these edges too. The real problem is that this goes all the way up to, you know, this edge stitch. Like there's only half a stitch even here. There's not a full stitch. So my original thought was that I was going to, you know, kind of cut away and create a squared off hole. I'd have live stitches up here, live stitches here, and that I would do like a Swiss darning thing that extended, it had to extend past the edge on either side. The problem was I didn't have a way to repair past this edge because I'm going to be using blue yarn. It's hard enough to find a color match to this yarn, never mind also trying to find the gray. So what I thought I'd do is a patch. Rather than using contrast yarn, which I used here, I'd use the replacement yarn and I would do a patch. You know, it's thick, and I thought even though I could make the edges pretty invisible, it's still a thick piece of fabric. And then I got a suggestion from Assia Brill. She wrote a book a couple of years ago. It came out just about this time a couple of years ago called Distitch. She had a suggestion that I thought was really interesting. I never would have thought of it in a million years. I wouldn't have known it was possible. She said to use a technique that Rick Mondragon had published, I think back in the 90s. And it was a way of replacing like a block of stockinette fabric. And his method is just along one edge. And she drew all of these pictures. I will link to that post down in the show notes because I think it's amazing that she did that work so that I could understand, you know, see what was going on. And what she basically said was, you know, you remove the part above and below the stripes. So her suggestion was basically to cut this blue part out, and I would capture all of the live stitches that I had, like maybe a row or two below here, and then the live stitches up here. And then I could use this sliding loop technique in order to knit across and attach to the existing Intarsia. What I could not visualize was taking out this fabric and not having all of those edge, you know, threads at the edge that would cause things to rip out this way. So I did a swatch where I knit, you know, all of this in white, and I just cut into the fabric. I cut all the way across, made sure I didn't cut into the green, and then I could pull this away. And what you see is this perfect stockinette edge. So if you look on the back side of Intarsia, what happens is when you finish working with one color and you're going to work with another, you don't just drop those colors. You don't just drop the white and start working the green, because if you did, you'd end up with two stockinette selvages and an opening between them. So what you have to do is you have to link those two colors together. That creates a running thread between the two stitches that connects the two stitches together. When you take the white away and you take those white loops away, the green ones are still there, and they're just a loop that comes around and goes from one row to the other. So what you can do is work all the way across, and you have your yarn threaded on a darning needle. And when you get to the end of the row, you are going into one of those loops in one row and then coming up through the other. And then you can work back in the other direction. Now in my case, because I have a stripe, I'm going to have edges on both sides. So as I go back across this way, then I catch the two loops on the other side and back and forth. What I'm going to do is catch the right legs of the row all the way across, so that once I take these stitches away, those will be just live stitches sitting on the needle. What I want to do is rip back so that I get to the beginning of a row. So I'll be ready to work a right side row going this way. And I don't know which one of these two rows it's going to be, so I'm just going to go down. Let's see. I want to make sure I don't have any damaged stitches. I'm going to go across this row right here. If I need to go down an additional row, I will. But I've got my 7 stitches on the needle. And now I'm going to cut across. I want to make sure that I'm not cutting anything that is gray. I'm just going to cut up the middle of these stitches here to make sure I don't cut anything gray. Okay. Okay, the problem with trying to rip this out, there we go, is that it's so fuzzy. You can see that this thread right here is connected to those two loops right there. So I'm going to pull this out. So that's going to rip across there. And then I need to pull that out from this side. And then I can get all the way back over to here. So I'm exactly where I want to be for these stitches right here. So I'm ready to begin a right side row. Let's say that when these come off the needle, that will be row number 1. And I want to be over here with the yarn in order to graft. Okay, I don't remember if I said 14 or 16 rows. Let's say 16 rows, and I've got 7 stitches across. It's 112 stitches, and I think my gauge, let me check my gauge. So 1, 2, 3, 4. So I have a gauge of 5 stitches per inch, kind of what I thought. So 5 stitches per inch, and I have 112 stitches. So that's 26 inches worth of fabric, and I need 3 times that length for each stitch, because if you think of a stitch as being round and it's this wide, then the amount of yarn it needs is pi times that, so 3. So about 70, what is that, 78 inches plus some to weave in an extra. So let's say 2.5 yards. I've got my lengths of yarn. I've got 2 strands because this is fingering weight and I want to make it worsted weight. So I'm going to thread these onto a yarn needle. So to get started, I want to look at where this cut strand was. So this is the original strand that would have formed the row above this, and you can see that it is through these 2 loops here. So what I'm going to do is just tie this one to tie the end of the new one onto the end of the old one, just to give it some tension and to get started, and so that I don't accidentally pull the tail too short. I just do a half knot and then slide it up to there. So I'm going to knit across with the new yarn. So now I've gotten to the end, and what I need to do is link this yarn to the gray yarn. So it's not done by picking up a stitch, it's done by going down in here and then up through here. So I'm linking this row to here. Pull it through. And now I can turn the work and go backward and purl back. And I'm going to link these again. So I'm going to go down where I came up before and then go up to the next one. I think it's looking pretty good so far. My stitches are a little bit uneven at the edge here. I can manually fix that later. Okay, so now I need to do the grafting. These are actually the running threads between stitches. So I need to link these together. I come in through here as if to purl, so I'm coming through the middle of the live stitch. So this comes off, this is as if to purl and comes off, goes and then goes up that way. Okay, so I think I can do my regular grafting at this point. Half purl on. Okay, so I'm going to have to fix the tension here, move that extra slack over, but otherwise I think it's a pretty good patch. So I'm just going to adjust the tension manually across here. Now this isn't something that I would have done when I knit this originally. It's just the having to knit back and forth in between these two things, I think, you know, created some unique tension issues. These are the original buttons that I had used for the sweater. I was trying to match one of the colors in the sweater, and so I got something that was close to this one right here. I liked that they had those little angles on it because it was geometric, but you know, some of them are kind of worn out. Somebody said, well, they're really dated. I'm like, the whole sweater is dated. It screams 1980s, but I did want to update the buttons. My niece had said, when I told her I was thinking about doing that, she suggested black. And I thought, I don't want to introduce another color to this sweater. And I said, maybe navy blue. I'll see if I can find some navy blue. And so I went and looked, couldn't find anything blue at the fabric store where I've been taking my sewing lessons. We looked at a bunch of different things, and there were some buttons I really liked, but I didn't think were quite right for the sweater. That happens a lot. Well, I'll find buttons that I love, and then I'm like, this is not going to work for the sweater. But the woman who was helping me found these 4 buttons that were like linked together with some thread. Just, I don't even know where they were. She found them, and these are the buttons, and they're black. She said, just think of black as being another shade of gray. And I liked it that they had this groove in them here, which, you know, adds to the geometry, but they're round. She'd shown me some square buttons that were really cool, but I think, you know, square buttons are always so hard to put through a buttonhole, and they just weren't quite right. They were really cool, but they weren't quite right. So I replaced the buttons. I washed the sweater, blocked it, and this is the result. So here's where I made that repair. It's you know, visible, but not strongly visible. And it really is showing up on camera more than it does in person. And there is a difference in the way it feels because this is Cascade Heritage. And so it's merino superwash. So it does feel different. You know, this is not like scratchy wool, but this is not merino. So you can feel the difference, but I think it's a pretty good fix. I'm really happy with the overall look of the sweater. Let me get back as far as I can so that you can see it. We've got the stripes. One thing that I did not change or update was the seams. One of the things that I really like about sort of revisiting things that I knit a long time ago is to see how far I've come. Like, my knitting was very good. If you look at this, this is a good job with the knitting. I can see the evidence of me not knowing certain things if they weren't explicitly stated in the pattern. So you can see that the 2 edges of this V-neck do not look the same. I think that they said to decrease, you know, at the beginning of a right side row here or at the end of a right side row here. And so I just used knit 2 together. And I did it in the edge. So then when I had to sew this button band on, I had to kind of sew into that stitch. So you can see, you know, knit 2 together leans to the right. So you can see we've got that here, and then over here they were leaning this way, but I had to sew in half of the stitch. So, you know, that's something I would not do these days. I would have placed the decrease a stitch in from the edge, from the selvage, so that when I seamed along the selvage, I'd have a nice clean line of stitches to take inside the seam. And then I would have a knit 2 together on this side, so you'd have that nice line of decreases. And then I would have done an SSK over here so that you'd have a line of stitches that would just edge up the sides. Kind of like this. These are twisted stitches, these aren't knit stitches, but that's what I did with those kinds of decreases. I found the book that this pattern originally came from. It was published in 1986. Here's what the different ways you could knit it look like. Look at, he's even got giant shoulder pads. And here are the instructions for shaping the neck. Decrease 1 stitch at neck edge on next and every following alternate row until this many stitches remain. So that is exactly what I did. I interpreted decrease 1 stitch as knit two together and I put it in the edge in the selvage stitch instead of near the selvage stitch. And that's how I ended up with the neck that I have. The only kind of seaming I knew at this time was like whip stitch and back stitch. And I think I used whip stitch for everything. So it doesn't look terrible, but you know, I could make it look a lot better these days. But I'm happy to preserve it. I'm happy to have rescued it and, you know, up and put in new buttons. The buttons needed to be sewn on again anyway because they were loose. So I'm just really happy that my brother's family wants to keep wearing this sweater. That makes me really happy as a knitter to see that it was worn and saved for 35 years. And the fact that there was a hole in it is proof that it was worn and that it was valued because they kept it and they, you know, can you fix this? So this really makes me happy. I'm very pleased with this fix. Well, that's it for this week's Casual Friday. If you have any comments or questions about today's video or suggestions for videos you'd like to see in the future, you can leave those down in the comments below or join the discussion in my Ravelry group, Rox Rocks. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.